Who is the prince who is to come? The one who makes the covenant with the many, the covenant that launches the tribulation, the one that seems to be ready to start on October 2nd. The entire internet is just buzzing with excitement about the UN Pact for the Future that was signed last week, and which most likely will launch that tribulation, also known as the 70th week of Daniel, the final 7 years of man's rule on earth. Christians are buzzing about this, wondering if it truly is that covenant. Globalists are buzzing and wringing their hands with joy over their newfound powers, especially the powers that have been given to the International Court of Justice to become the ultimate source of judicial power in the world. It's like controlling the USA's Supreme Court, except on steroids. This court will soon trump any decisions made by the Supreme Court or any other court in the world. We have gone on record saying that the chance of the pact for the future being the covenant with the many, or at least part of it, is probably, 95, 99%. And we discussed the reasons in this previous video. Link in the description. This is Bible teacher Nelson Walters, and now that the covenant is approved, it's time to discuss who the mysterious prince who is to come is, the one who made the covenant that launched the tribulation. A month ago, we released this video about that topic and said that we would postpone giving out our thoughts on who the prince might be until the covenant was approved. Well, now it's been approved, and it is time to begin to speculate who it was that was behind this agreement and the future agreements between the nations of the Middle East that will make up the covenant. It's time to name names. Names like, what about Mohammed bin Salman? What about King Charles? What about this guy? The name we're not allowed to say on the air. And other folks. Maybe Trump. Maybe the Pope. We're going to talk about all of them today. Now, the popular theory has always been that this prince was either the Antichrist or Jesus, with most people favoring the idea that it was the Antichrist. Now, that popular video that we just referenced, the one that we did, which was groundbreaking because it revealed something about prophecy that very, very few Christians knew about or understood. And that was that the prince is likely not the Antichrist, nor is he Jesus. I'm sure that's shocking to you, so let me explain. Let's start with the passage where the prophecy comes from, Daniel 9:26 through 27. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And he shall confirm a strong covenant with the many for 1 week. This is a well-known passage. It's obvious from this verse that a prince who shall come will confirm a covenant. That part everybody agrees about. The covenant will last a week, or in Hebrew, a shabuim. From the context, we know this is a week of years, a 7-year-long period of time that kind of mimics a week of days, with 6 years of work and a final 7th year of rest, the sabbatical year, instead of 6 days of work and a Sabbath. These prophetic facts are well known by scholars and most Christians interested in prophecy. What isn't well known is that this prince seems to appear later, again, in the book of Daniel, in Daniel 11:22. I personally have never heard anyone else talk about this. But in this verse, the prince of the covenant, is broken or killed by the Antichrist. If this is a correct interpretation, this means he can't be either the Antichrist or Jesus. Let's look at that verse. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him, the Antichrist, and be broken, even the prince of the covenant. The Hebrew word for prince, nagid, is the same. The Hebrew word for covenant is the same, barit, in both passages. These are the only places in the book of Daniel where the words are found, chapter 9, and then later in chapter 11. Now, some will say, wait a minute. This is a prince of the Holy Covenant. It's just someone from Israel that's broken or killed. Well, they may be from Israel or they may not, but this covenant listed isn't the Holy Covenant. When the Old Testament speaks of the Holy Covenant, it usually precedes it with the word the the covenant, the definitive article, making it the most important covenant of all. Daniel 9:4 does this. Or it precedes the word covenant with the word holy. Daniel 11 does this in multiple other places. When neither of those two things happen, however, the Bible is usually talking about a secular covenant. The only two places where this happens in the book of Daniel are Daniel 9:27 and Daniel 11:22, where it links to a secular covenant. So the prince of the covenant who is broken in Daniel 11:22 is the prince of a secular covenant. So that prince that's broken is associated with a secular covenant of some kind. Doesn't it make sense that it's the same secular covenant as the covenant with the many, the one found in Daniel 9:27? Now, to be fair, it is possible that there are actually two princes. The Antichrist, who makes or causes the covenant with the many, on the one side, and the prince who actually signs that covenant from the other side. Every agreement has at least two sides, you know. So could one prince be an Israeli and the other the Antichrist, who forces or causes the covenant upon the Israeli? Yeah, it's entirely possible. So I think we should consider both possibilities. Maybe the prince who is to come is a secular person who just enforces the covenant on Israel, or maybe it's the Antichrist who does this. We shouldn't get ourselves completely fixated on one idea yet. So now we get to the interesting part, which is where we name names. But before we do that, we need to understand exactly how the Prince of the Covenant of Daniel 9:27 is related to the covenant. Does he make the covenant, as many Bible translations incorrectly assume? Does he confirm it, or does he do something else? To know that, we have to look at the verb. We already said it isn't the word make. The Hebrew word translated make or confirm in 9:27 in so many Bible translations is the word gabar, which really means to be strong or to be mighty, to prevail, to exert, or to enforce. The verb is found in the Hifel form, which is kind of a really scholarly, nerdy kind of form, which means that it's the prince who causes these actions. The prince doesn't do it directly. That's very important. He causes the covenant to be strong, or he causes the covenant to prevail, or he causes the covenant to be enforced. This is really, really important, and like nobody wants to talk about it. Of course, because it's nerdy. The prince, be he the Antichrist or a secular leader, isn't sitting behind a desk and confirming or signing or making the covenant. He's causing others to have the covenant be strong, causing others to make the covenant win or prevail over someone, or causing it to be enforced. This meaning, which is the literal meaning of the Hebrew verb, is different than most Christians think. The prince isn't signing the agreement. He's behind the scenes making these things happen. Now, as we discussed in the previous video, the pact for the future is the vehicle that appears to be designed to force a false peace on Israel and to divide the land of Israel into two states. This seems to fit with the verb in Daniel 9:27, where the prince causes the covenant with the many to prevail over Israel or to be enforced on Israel. At the recent UN Summit for the Future, a member of the elders, the quote elders, spoke, Helen Clark. She said that now that power has been given to the UN and the International Court of Justice through the pact, arrest warrants need to be issued for Israeli leaders. A ban on all weapons supplied to Israel need to be issued. Middle East nations need to all join the Abraham Accords, and economic sanctions need to be applied until Israel complies with the two-state solution. This is the type of forcing an agreement upon Israel that we were just talking about. So who is behind the scenes trying to bring this about? That person is likely the Prince of the Covenant. If we figure out who's doing it, he's the Prince of the Covenant. or maybe even the Antichrist. Ms. Clark is likely only a mouthpiece. My advisory board and I have spent some time coming up with a list of possible candidates to keep your eyes on. But first, let's come up with the criteria that may help identify him. He's a prince, so he's a male. First, he has to have direct ties to the UN. He likely helped to get the Pact for the Future approved. Second, he strongly desires a two-state solution. Third, he has power and authority to get these kind of steps accomplished. Fourth, he needs a link to the Abraham Accords. And fifth, he's working behind the scenes. So our advisory board came up with a short list of characters: King Charles, Klaus Schwab, Trump, this other American president, who we call he who cannot be named, Mohammed bin Salman, and the Pope. Looking at this list, one of these is not like the others. Did you notice that? One of these is not a globalist in the traditional sense, and probably does not have the political power currently to have gotten the Pact for the Future approved by the UN. In fact, he is generally hated by all the others on this list. That, of course, is Trump, so he just doesn't seem like a likely candidate in my mind. He did initiate the two-state solution that's on the board now, and the Abraham Accords, but not being in office currently and not being liked by the international community kind of disqualifies him in my mind. Now, the second person I'd take off this list is Klaus Schwab. He seems more like a mouthpiece also for the globalists than an actual power behind the curtain. And the same can be said of the Pope. Plus, both of these candidates are quite a bit older, Pope and Klaus Schwab. So that leaves three main candidates in my mind: King Charles, this former American president, who we cannot name his name, and Mohammed bin Salman. All three could be Antichrist, or all three could be the secular prince, who is later terminated by the Antichrist in Daniel 11:22. So we have three relatively strong candidates. MBS has been the most visible in being involved with the Israeli peace process all the way back to the days when Jared Kushner met with him to create the deal of the century. MBS has continued to meet with U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to craft ceasefire and a two-state solution ever since. So he is a very strong candidate from that aspect. Notice I call this guy the former American president. I found out on our channel that if I even mention his name, the video gets dinged. That in itself is a sign that there's something up with him. I can mention any other president, nothing happens. Mention him, and the video gets dinged and underperforms. So I've chosen not to mention that name. Let's call him the name you must not say. Now, many, if not the majority of Americans, and even non-Americans, feel that the name you must not say is the power behind the curtain in the current USA administration, that he might be the one calling the shots. That's true. He is the one sending Blinken to the Middle East to meet with Mohammed bin Salman. Makes him a candidate too. As far as King Charles, I haven't heard of him being involved with the Middle East peace process directly. He says all the prerequisite right things from a globalist standpoint. However, an interesting secret meeting took place between England's Prime Minister and the name we must not say back in March. The name we must not say was seen at the Prime Minister's residence. So there might be some backdoor connection between him and King Charles. Hard to say. In terms of the Pact for the Future, all three have been very much behind the scenes, almost invisible. None of them have made an official speech or public appearance at the UN in regard to the pact. In fact, Mohammed bin Salman's Saudi government were one of only 22 governments not to vote yes on the pact. The Saudis abstained. Does not sound to me like someone causing the pact to be passed. In the back of my mind, this makes MBS much less likely than the other two. But as I'm thinking about it, it brings up a seventh potential person, the Secretary General of the UN, Guterres. Certainly no one was behind the pact more than Guterres, and he has been very vocal about a two-state solution as well. It's just, he seems like kind of a less important person, so you don't think about him. But the next Secretary General election isn't until 2026. So although the name that we cannot say has expressed interest in that job, it's too far out for anyone else to fill that role as part of the covenant with the many. But Gutierrez is Portuguese, and the prince who is to come, it's his people that had to have helped destroy the temple. It kind of removes Gutierrez. In fact, this issue of the people of the prince who is to come is a problem for every one of the candidates. None of them are Romans. Teacher Joel Richardson has done research on who the people groups were who actually destroyed the temple, and he found out that Syrians and other Middle Eastern peoples made up the majority of the Roman army that burned the temple, so we should probably include Middle Easterners as well in the people of the prince who is to come. But only Mohammed bin Salman is from that region. You could probably stretch things with the name we cannot say and consider him, he's a nominal Muslim, so, perhaps you could, boy, that really seems to be stretching it. But in terms of Mohammed bin Salman, remember, he's the one who abstained from the pact for the future. However, if he plays a prominent role in negotiating the final aspect of the covenant, the dividing of the land of Israel, something that he's participated in from the start, well, maybe that counts. As we said, the name that we can't say has Muslim background, but it is really hard to say that it was his people that destroyed the temple in 70 AD. In terms of King Charles, his royal lineage can only be traced to the Middle Ages, so no one can say if he has Roman heritage or not. And remember this, none of them have to be the Antichrist to be the prince who is to come. It's the Antichrist who likely is the one who eliminates the prince of the covenant, as we explained in this video. Is this the same event where the Antichrist and the 10 kings burn Mystery Babylon with fire in Revelation 17:16? Maybe the prince of the covenant is the head of Mystery Babylon. It makes sense. Antichrist could take them out together. And almost 4 years ago, we began predicting this is exactly what would happen. Click right here to keep watching and see that older video and why the United Nations has always been a prime candidate to fulfill biblical prophecy and be Babylon and the global governance system. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.